26 years. She has a passion for motivating students through effective building of social emotional learning and cultural relevant environments. Tracy sees access to an equitable education as a social justice problem that requires rethinking how instructional leaders view school climate, curriculum, and relationships. So I will pass it over to Dr. Tracy Johnson.
Thank you. Thank you. And so I want to thank AXA for the invitation. I really do appreciate you and your work, and also Brandon for allowing me the opportunity to present. So once again, my name is Tracy Johnson. I have been an educator for about 26 years. And what I do is I support teachers in providing academic interventions for students. I've been an intervention coordinator, intervention teacher. I've been a facilitator for the district. I work for Los Angeles Unified School District, and I'm really am passionate about social emotional learning and cultural relevant teaching pedagogy. In order for me to really tap into my students, I have to start with cultural relevant piece and also social emotional learning before we can even move to making sure that they have access to the curriculum. And we're going to talk about this today about what is social emotional learning and uh, cultural relevant teaching. So our overview is this. We will discuss social emotional learning and cultural relevant pedagogy, and we will also touch upon intercultural education. And my goals really are to inform educators about resources and strategies to support an intercultural education that is culturally responsive. The big idea and the takeaway that I want you to leave today with is to develop cultural relevant teaching and social emotional learning competencies, and that we need to connect cultural relevant teaching and social emotional learning within our classroom practice. We also need to understand our implicit biases, and we'll get into why that's important. So I would like to begin with a quote. The quote is from Zaretta Hammond, and she has a book that talks about cultural relevant teaching and the brain. And so the quote is CRT, which is cultural responsive teaching or cultural relevant teaching, and CEL both help students get into the right mental state for learning through self regulation, getting along with others, and similar skills. So, what is SAIL? What is it, and what does it look like within your classroom dynamic? And so, we know it's the process in which children and adults understand and manage their emotions. And so, basically, you're looking at self management, self awareness, social awareness, responsible decision making, relationship skills, and cultural responsive teaching has everything to do with this. And so when we look at these, the self-management and the self-awareness, we look at the EQs that we as teachers have, and also the EQs of our children, our emotional intelligence, and how we support that within the classroom dynamics. And so what it might look like in the classroom is what you see to the right, the image, where students practice self-awareness by identifying how they feel throughout the day, especially when confused with difficult academic tasks. And so the teacher identifies the social and emotional competencies needed for the academic work and incorporate them into his or her lesson plan. And students really develop relationships such as communication and collaboration. And if you take a look at the classroom, it's pretty set up, what we see in the typical kindergarten classroom. But we want to expand this to our fifth grade classrooms, high school opportunities where they can turn and talk and kind of get in a mode of cooperative learning and communication. And the only way to do this is when you set up where the children actually can face one another and touch base with one another. And so the teacher uses these teachable moments to guide the students through social and emotional changes, such as conflict mediation, and also they take the time to model. This is really crucial that they model. They do the think alouds and describing how they feel. And they use this as leverage to create a community that builds rapport. We have a relationship. So, what is cultural relevant practices? Geneva Gay states that cultural responsive pedagogy uses cultural knowledge, prior experiences, frames of reference, and performance styles of ethnically diverse students to make learning more relevant to and effective for them. And so we need to reflect on cultural responsive practices. And what she is stating is that students' cultural strengths and identities are used as assets. And Zaretta Hammond, her book, it talks about this and how we develop social, emotional, and academic skills that promote school and life success. Now, Gloria Ladson Billings, she basically is the creator of the word cultural relevant practices. And what she asserts is that assisting students in developing critical perspectives that challenges inequities is very important, and that we have to have an authentic belief that students from cultural diverse and low income backgrounds are capable learners. And so we will touch base a little bit later about what that looks like in its entirety. So we have in front of you, this comes from basically the collaborative academic social emotional learning. And so that is the circle that you see in the middle. And basically it is the practice of social emotional learning. Has They have 5 different areas, and we kind of talked about that before: self-awareness, self-management, self-awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision making. And so as you can see, it connects cultural relevant teaching. You can see where self-management, if you take a look to the left, it it's stress tolerance, it's control, it's self-motivating, it's self-fulfillment, right? And when we take a look at the self-awareness piece, you're looking at self-confidence. And so they interlock. It's like a puzzle. They fit together. They fit together. And so we are going to move forth right now because I think it's a great opportunity. I've given you a lot of information for you to take the time to reflect. And so, if you don't mind, I would like for you to reflect on a time when you built a positive relationship with your students. But I want you to think whole group, where you're looking at your whole class dynamic. Do you feel that your students received what they needed to develop their full potential as a whole? You're looking at the whole group. And a lot of times we will say, yes, this particular class was wonderful, and I was able to teach, and the students were responsive, and we were able to meet all of the Common Core state standards. But I really want you to take the time to do some reflection and individualize it for each student. This time, I want you to think about the same classroom, but the question is, do you feel that each of your students received what he or she needed to develop his or her full potential? And then why or why not? And I'm going to just pause for a second because I think this is really important for us to discuss, because this is what it's about. Our teacher performance expectations speaks to this, and our California teacher standards, it speaks to this about each of your students. It says all receive what he or she needed to develop his or her full potential. And so the big concept here really is equity. And we're going to really think about the whole child when we are reflecting on equity. We're taking a look at social emotional learning. We're taking a look at the cultural relevant teaching piece, but we have to think about the whole child, the human being that is sitting in your classroom. That's where our work begins. And so we need to start off with the brain. And you know, when we teach, sometimes we don't reflect on this. Sometimes we are given a set of books and we say, okay, let me lesson plan. And sometimes we are thinking about what standards we need to meet by a certain time, or maybe the students have some form of interim assessments from the district that they must take, and we're trying to figure out how we can move across those standards. But we really have to start here and thinking about the brain and how the children are perceiving what we are teaching. So when we think about the prefrontal cortex, it helps us make good choices and pay attention and learn. And the hippocampus, it helps us remember what we learn and it stores our memories. And the amygdala, it helps us, it's our safety network. It's what helps us to manage our emotions. When we have our strong emotions, that's the part of the brain that it impacts. And so when we think about the brain and our students that are in our classroom, we have to realize that they are social beings. This is something that Doretta Hammond touches upon, that they are social beings, and the brain is a social organ. And so for them to sit in a classroom and not to feel comfortable because their cortisol is all, it's wired up. And so then it blocks them from learning. They become disengaged. They mistrust. And so we have to really take a look at their emotions. We can't um, just move through the California standards. We have to first start with the child that's there. We're looking at the whole child. And so relationships are important. It really is the key to learning. And so we have to tap into the brain power of the child. And when we tap into this brain power, Hammond considers this the intellective capacity. This is what helps our students to be able to process information. Okay, it's the information that they are receiving, because we have to have cognitive routines within the classroom dynamic. And so when we reflect on the brain and we see how a child can shut down, we have to be able to build relationships with our children. And we need to know the child that is sitting before us each and every day. And we need to know what is their culture. It does not mean that cultural relevant teaching does not mean that we are looking at a bunch of multicultural books, or we are taking the time to make sure that we are celebrating different holidays that represents the children within our classroom. It's not about learning 50 different languages. It's really about valuing our students that are in front of us. And it's about tapping into who they are to give us leverage so that we can teach the California state standards. It really sets us up pretty well. And so the Center for Reaching and Teaching the Whole Child has a wonderful graphic organizer. We always use graphic organizers within our classroom domain. And this is really a good graphic organizer that tells you about social emotional learning and also cultural relevant teaching, but it shows you the competencies are aligned and how it is congruent, how it fits together like a puzzle, right? We know that our goals are to have a safe and supportive learning environment, and that we have to have equity in teaching and learning. And we know that our children, they need resilience and a sense of optimism. And we know that we want our students to academically succeed, right? However, we have to, as teachers, we have to develop a lens. So this is really about our teaching practice. It's, how are we sharpening it, and how are we looking through multiple perspectives? Do we have our reflection lens on? Are we modeling? Are we tapping into our social emotional lens? Are we tapping into our academical lens? how do we, we're always turning the dial and taking and look at our class and observing, because the goal is to get better, right? And we have to practice to get better. Same things that we tell our students within the classroom domain, we have to be willing to do the same thing. And so we have to develop these lenses. And then when we take a look at the anchor competencies of building trusting relationships, fostering self reflection, growth mindset, cultivating perseverance, creating a community, and promoting collaborative learning and respond constructively across the differences, we see how it aligns to the teaching performance expectations and how it aligns to the California teaching standards, right? And so we know that this is what we need to do, but it's the how. And the how is that we have to make sure that the teacher have moves, that they're constantly doing the things that are in the outer rim. They make sure that they identify their and interrupt microaggressions. They're providing a restorative justice. They're practice of building consensus within the classroom, right? All of these things are really crucial to having a social emotional learning and a cultural relevant teaching uh, practice within the classroom domain. So a picture is really worth 1,000 words. And so there's a lot going on within this picture, right? What you see are children basically standing on crates. Some are. And then you have some children that are not standing on a crate, right? So when we take a look at equality, you see that every child received the same thing, but yet there's still a barrier there. And when we look at the cartoon for equity, then what we see is every child is getting what they need, right? And so, but and the fence is there. So the child that's on the left, he doesn't get a box because he doesn't need it, right? And the child that's in the middle might need just one box to be able to reach that goal. And then the child that's here on the second, on the third, in the third area has two boxes. But really, social justice is about removing the fence, and so that everyone can have a starting part, starting from the same point. And so we just kind of remove that barrier. And that's what social justice is. And this is built off of the work of Dr. Groverman, who suggests that we have to change how we talk and act, and we have to change how we structure our learning environment, right? And this brings me to a reflection quote that I want you to look at. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the quote, and I need you to experience it in three different ways, okay? Three different ways. Um, the first time I read it, I want you to think about um, what do you think about when you hear this statement? A culturally relevant teacher is someone who understands that we're operating in a fundamentally inequitable system. They take that as a given. And this is written by Gloria Latson Billing. This is the quote from her. You know, what do you think when you hear this statement? Now, this time I want you to tap into how you feel when you hear it. How do you feel when I say a culturally relevant teacher is someone who understands that we're operating in a fundamentally inequitable system? They take that as a given. Personalize it. How does it make you feel? Now, lastly, what is your initial belief about the statement? And this becomes very important to our work in a social emotional learning and a cultural relevant teaching environment. It becomes really important here. And so we have to recognize it, we have to internalize it, and then we have to respond to it. And so at the end of the day, I believe we all want a big impact within our classroom dynamic, but not just the classroom dynamic, in education as a whole. We want our children to succeed. I haven't met a teacher or an educator yet that did not want their children to succeed. They want their students to succeed. So when we um, think about our classroom dynamic, we have to really think about ourselves. The quest for self knowledge is how we choose to engage with people around us. I apologize for that. Let me go back. Um, the quest for self knowledge is how we choose to engage with people around us. It is basically human identity determines our actions, our social development, and our position. And so we have to take the time to really think about our classroom domain. And when we think about it and we think about ourselves, we have to realize that sometimes we have what's called unconscious and conscious biases. We have, there are explicit, there's implicit, and then there is the microaggression. Okay. And so what explicit means is that it's expressed directly, it's outward, it's, we are very much aware of it, we are conscious about it, and this is just a statement, this is who we are and this is what we believe, right? And so an example of this would be women who are mothers do not have time to do research. Now implicit biases is that it's expressed indirectly. We are not conscious about it. We are unaware of our bias. So, not promoting a woman with a family or inviting a woman to do research because she has a family. You just didn't think about it and you didn't invite the person to the table. And then there's this microaggressions that we have, right? Where everyday verbal or nonverbal snubs. It could be, it can be intentional, it might be unintentional, but we communicate this negative message to a target person based solely upon their marginalized group or membership. And so it could be something as an assertive female leader is labeled as dramatic, while her male counterpart is described as a forceful leader. Okay. And if we want to put it in plain terms, we can even use shapes, right? We can say that an explicit example could be maybe we have a triangle and we have a rectangle and we have a circle. And so we say those circles do not belong with our group because it, they don't have angles. And then implicit would be something like the shapes are all, the triangle and the rectangle are sitting at the table, and they don't invite the circle over because they didn't think about it. You know, they didn't think about, you know, the person or who the person is this is unaware of a bias. And then lastly, the microaggression could be something like, you know, the circle is, you know, basically round and, you know, bounces all over the place. And so, you know, like a ball. And so we have these different things, we have these microaggressions, and sometimes we need to really think about what they mean to the people around us. And so this is where we have to really do some self work. So our biases, it really does refer to our attitudes and stereotypes that we have. And these behaviors impacts how we behave in the world. And it basically, we have to engage in honest reflection, and it has to be constant. It has to be a constant self-awareness. We're constantly making sure that we're looking through multiple lenses so that we can our behaviors can impact how we behave in the world. So if you take a look at the arrows, our attitudes and stereotypes, it impacts our behaviors in the world. But then if you take a look, our goal is really to engage in honest reflection and constant self-awareness so that we can, and it goes back to behave, our behavior, you know, and how we impact the world. We want it to be in a positive um, light. We want everything to, want to make sure that we're not being negative, that we're not using our microaggressions. And so it takes me back to this wonderful graphic organizer where we are looking specifically at our teacher moves, our anchor competencies, and developing lens so that we can obtain goals. And the Common Core standards says that we must create independent thinkers, right? And so, we have all these strategies to take in new information. We want to make sure that we're using cognitive strategies. Remember, the brain is important. And we want to make sure that we do not negate to reflect on the brain and make sure that we're tapping into our learners so that they can retrieve information from their long-term memory. And then we want to also make sure that the teacher is not doing all of the front loading constantly, because we don't want dependent learners. We want independent learners. And this is about equity, right? So this doesn't seem very much equitable when we have students that need a whole lot of scaffolding, that's always unsure of tasks, that and then you have teachers like myself who will have to intervene because I'm the intervention teacher, or I'm the intervention coordinator. And then now I have to go in and start with social emotional learning. We'll really start with cultural relevant teaching and tap into the social emotional learning piece so that I can then make sure that I'm adding rigor within their classroom dynamic so that they have access to the core curriculum. Okay. Our children, they come with a lot of knowledge. And so we have to tap into that knowledge so that we are adding rigor. We do not want to dumb down the classroom. We do not want to have to constantly have students that are dependent learners. Our goal is to push them so that they are independent learners. And that takes a lot of time, that we have to show our students that we care. We have to make sure that they know that our goal is to make sure that they are accelerating their own learning. We have to make sure that they acknowledge who they are and recognize what they bring to the classroom. Okay. And so this graphic organizer from Center for Reaching and Teaching the Whole Child, it really gives some examples of what teachers should do to kind of create this environment. And so it brings me to, what is an intercultural education? And an intercultural education is an education that respects, celebrates, and recognizes diversity in all areas of human lives, and that we raise children's awareness of their own culture, and that they understand there are ways of behaving and other value systems. Children develop respect for lifestyles, differences, and they learn from them and they understand and appreciate each other. And basically, children speak for themselves and articulate their cultures and histories. And the Common Core state standards, it really does provide that for us, right? Because we are supposed to have our children really, have diving into these constructive conversations. The children are supposed to engage in cooperative learning. They are to look through multiple perspective lens in a multiple perspective way. They are to build on their historical knowledge and do comparisons of different societies. The Common Core sets us up for that. So if we tap into who they are and we make sure that we are valuing their lived experiences, then we pretty much can ensure that our students are making sure that they are independent learners, because some of the responsibility is on them, that they have all the tools that they need. So here we go. Let's get into these crucial conversations. Let's dialogue. Let's make sure that we show that we are a caring environment. Let's make sure that we are tapping into the anchor standards, which require our students to work in collaborative learning environments, and that they are cultivating perseverance and they have a growth mindset because we value who they are. So when I talk about lived experiences, our students, they come with a lot of knowledge about their self and their communities. And when they share their experiences with others, it affirms who they are. And so, as teachers, we really have to take a look at ourselves. Are we looking at things from a narrow point of view? Are we widening up so that we see the view? Is it clear? Is it blurry? We really have to analyze ourselves so that we can have an environment where children want to express their lived experiences, that they feel affirmed. And not only do they feel affirmed, that they have the skill sets that they need to be able to access the curriculum and not only access, but they can demonstrate that they are an accelerated learner. So I want us to reflect, and this is a great time because we are shifting to um, a time where there's online learning, okay, because of the COVID-19 safer at home policies. And so now we have children at home, but the learning must continue. Now, in the beginning, there was like a digital divide. There probably still is because some children are using a mobile device. They don't have the technology, so they're using their phone and they're trying to Zoom on a phone, and they can't see their classmates, so they have to slide it, and they're learning a new in a new environment. And then you have some children that are using a tablet. They have access to distant learning, but they have to download an app, right? Their Wi-Fi might not work. I feel very fortunate that the school site that I am at, our school is a one-to-one technology initiative where each child has a laptop, an iPad, and we were able to give each student one when we left the campus. But I'm not going to say that there have not been some issues, right? I mean, we have students that have a tablet, but their Wi-Fi might not be working. And then you have students that have everything. They have a desktop computer, they have a quiet environment, uh, they're ready. It's no problem whatsoever. But we have children that have 4 or 5 siblings in the home, and they might have 4 or 5 different technologies, but then their bandwidth is just not working well. So you have to go back to this picture, which is a picture is worth 1,000 words. We are looking at what's happening, reality, we're looking at equality, we're looking at equity, and we're looking at social justice. And so during this time, it will call for us to change how we talk and also how we act. Going back to Dr. Broberman's theory about the fence, that we have to change how we talk and act, and we have to change how we structure our learning environment. And so, as we reflect on an intercultural education, it is really is developmental, right? And it's the sense that learners advance through stages of progressively more sophisticated levels of understanding. And this understanding includes that of different cultures as well as their own. And so when we start thinking about the digital divide right now, it's called for us to rethink how we teach. We still have the California state standards, right? We still need to make sure that our children have access to the curriculum. And we must make sure that our students, that we have to provide we have to take away any type of barrier that's there that's preventing them from learning as much as we possibly can. So when we are creating a learning environment, we have to think about them in mind, right? And so it's like I said, cultural relevant teaching is not about a multicultural education. It's not about reading a bunch of diverse literature. Zaretta Hammond talks about this, and it's not about just teaching. It's about building relationships across culturally diverse communities, and it's also about culturally responsive teaching, that we have to respond to what's happening in our students' lived lives, right? It goes back to their lived experiences, their narrative, who they are, what is happening. And when we go back and rethink about developing the lens, we have to develop the lens of an academic lens. We have to think about a social emotional lens. We have to think about an equity lens. And we have to think about their brain and how they are feeling right about now, even with the digital divide, even with online learning, what is happening to them, how are they feeling, how are they coping, so that we can make sure that we create an environment where there's academic rigor. And so I want to touch base on this quote again, which is culturally relevant. A cultural relevant teacher is someone who um, understands that we're operating in a fundamentally inequitable system. They take that as a given. So we have to plan for these inequitable um, systems. We have to make sure that in our mind, we know the children that we are teaching. We have to make sure that they are valued, and not only are they valued, but their experiences are affirmed so that we can tap into their brain power. Because the end goal is to make sure that our students are given authentic engagement and rigor so that they can really thrive academically. So we are humanizing education, okay? We need tools and resources to be able to do that, but we are humanizing education. We are developing an academic lens, an equity lens, a cell lens, and that goes back to the Center of for Reaching and Teaching the Whole Child, looking at that graphic organizer and making sure that we're developing the lens. And then we are looking at the anchor competencies when we are planning for our students, okay? Although we're looking at the California standards, we still have to look at our anchor competencies. What do we need our children to do? How do we need to foster a growth mindset? How do we need them how are we going to ensure that we have a community within our classroom dynamic that promotes collaborative learning? And how are we making sure that we have a constructivist approach where it's hands on? All of these things are very important. And so the teacher makes sure that she or he is moving through the teacher moves so that we can do this. So we're building trust with our students because we have to build trust before we can even teach our students. And then we develop a we care relationship. We care about our students, we care about our families, and we care about our communities. And we have to ensure that they feel that we care about them because it needs to be authentic, okay? And then their value lived experience. We have to value their lived experiences. We have to make sure that the children are clearly being able to look through multiple perspectives, that they are communicating, and that we have a cooperative learning environment, and not only a cooperative learning environment, but it's an environment where children feel valued and affirmed. Okay, that's very key, valued and affirmed. And if we do this, it will help students effectively process information through cognitive routines. We want to make sure that the children have a routine cognitively. What are we doing as teachers to reflect on the brain? Think about how the brain processes. Think about how some children can have cortisol, and how it can, kind of break down those emotions where they're not having a great day. And so we have to make sure that when they walk in our classroom, that we have cognitive routines that can support them in managing their emotions, okay? And then the power of reflection. We want our students to reflect. That's something that we do all the time, but we have to be willing to reflect as well as teachers. We have to be willing to go back and reflect on, are we developing an academic lens? Are we providing an equity lens? Are we providing a social emotional lens? Are we making sure that our children are valued and they feel affirmed? Are we making sure that we are building trust so that we can develop a we care relationship? See, all of this is kind of like a full circle. And that's why uh, marrying the two, cultural relevant teaching and um, social emotional learning, is extremely powerful, extremely powerful. So one of the things that I said that I wanted to do is leave you with resources. And so a lot of the images that you saw in the PowerPoint or some of the wording came from these organizations that, Center for Reaching and Teaching. We have the Castle, the California, um, uh, we have the, I'm sorry, we have the California Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. We are looking at the Acknowledge Alliance and the Cultural Responsive Brain Teaching, but not just that, but we also have National Equity Projects. These are some of the resources that are available to us that we can tap in. They each have a website that you can go on that speaks to this. And the beauty of this is really the same language, that we are making sure that we are looking at how our environment is, in how we are making sure how our environment is integrating certain skills throughout the day so that we can ensure that our children are accelerated learners. So once again, the goal is not to have dependent learners. We don't want to have to scaffold. Me being an intervention teacher, I don't want to have to continue scaffolding for children, right? I need to make sure that I build them up. I need to make sure that they are able to control their emotions, they're managing their emotions, and that they're validated. And when I do that, believe it or not, I reduce the children being in the intervention program, because that's the goal. The goal is not for them to stay. The goal is for them to academically succeed. And I have children that are academically succeeding now, just as well as they're the next student within the classroom domain. And it's really because of social emotional learning and cultural relevant teaching. So I just want to say thank you for all of you coming today. And you can find me. I have my information there. And if you have questions, this would be the time.
Okay, I do not see anything in the chat box. So if anybody has any questions to place in the chat box, if not, you can go ahead and sign off. As I mentioned, we will be posting a copy of the recording on the AXA Resource Hub. And again, thank you, Dr. Tracy, for assisting us today in having this webinar. We will be taking the summer off from AXA webinars, but we will return in October. So be sure to check the Resource Hub for the up and coming events.
Thank you so much to you both. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Still don't see any questions. We'll hang on one more second here. I do see participants dropping off. All righty. Well, everyone have a great day, and thank you for participating.